Today we'll be taking a look at one of the craziest cases that I've ever reviewed on the channel, as well as one of the smallest. This is the NZXT H1, and despite the tiny footprint, the price may surprise you. Let me just hit you with the bad news from the jump. The NZXT H1 is $350. Now that price tag will scare away a huge amount of consumers. And when NZXT first reached out to me to see if I wanted a review unit, I almost said no, simply because I didn't think anybody in their right mind would want to shell out that much cash for a case that holds such a small amount of hardware. But to be honest, I'm glad that I decided to look at it, because despite the initial sticker shock, there is a surprising amount of value in this tiny package. The majority of that value is derived from the form of extras that NZXT has decided to bundle with the H1. And not only that, but they come pre-installed and ready for you to drop in a motherboard and just hit the power button. My rep was very excited about the ease of installation in this case. And as it turns out, he was completely correct. Usually with a case this size, you have to struggle to install a small power supply, route shorter than normal cables, find a place to mount a cooler and route those tubes, hook up the riser cable and get that out of the way, and then hope that you can close up the whole thing without suffocating your components or cutting your hands up. In the H1, NZXT has taken a lot of that work off of your plate. It comes with a 650 watt 80 plus gold rated power supply already installed. And this includes not only just screwing it into place, but also routing the 24 pin, the EPS and the PCIe cables to their appropriate chambers, and the pass-through cable down through the bottom of the case. It also has a 140mm all-in-one liquid cooler pre-installed and ready to drop onto your CPU of choice. The cooler comes with appropriate mounting hardware for both Intel and AMD. And the tubes are configured and angled in such a way that they naturally fall out of the way of your hardware. One of the cooler innovations here was the way that you access the motherboard tray area. There are two screws holding the radiator mount in place, and when you undo them, the radiator hinges down, exposing the standoffs for a relatively pain-free install. The way I usually do these case reviews is to take the case out of the box and completely disassemble it and reassemble it before moving on to the actual component install. But in this case, I had to drop in a motherboard because the process seemed really easy, and indeed it was, with almost all of the cabling lining up perfectly in pre-positioned routing areas. Total assembly time for the system was like 5 minutes. That's not an exaggeration. Both the front tempered glass panel and the rear perforated panel pop off toollessly, and the rest of the housing just slides off to the top. From there, you undo the two radiator bracket screws, screw the motherboard down, plug in all the cabling that's already where it needs to be, and then two thumb screws for your GPU around the other side, and that's literally it. This entire process was a revelation, and I hope that more case manufacturers can follow suit, small form factor or otherwise. And as we reevaluate that $350 price tag, maybe now it doesn't seem so crazy. You get a 650 watt SFX power supply, which is around $100 at retail, 140mm AIO, which is probably $80 or so, and a preformed PCIe riser cable, which is like maybe another $20. So that's $200 in accessories right there, making the cost of the case itself $150. At CES 2020, we saw Asus debut their Z11 Mini ITX case, and while it was fully featured, that case alone was $300 without a power supply, without a cooler, or without anything else. Well-engineered small form factor cases can certainly be pricey, so when you take that into consideration, maybe the H1 isn't really all that out of line with what you would expect. But let's get back to looking at the rest of this case. The exterior has one tempered glass panel with a subtle NZXT logo at the bottom. The white-black contrast on my review unit does look pretty great, but just be aware that this isn't meant as a gaudy desk piece. There's no lights inside shining through or anything like that. It's supposed to be understated. The sliding cover unit has removable dust filters on both sides behind the perforations, but the detachable black side piece is not filtered, so just keep an eyeball on that. Once the panels are off, you have easy access to the 2.5-inch drive mounting trays by unclipping this small cover. There's room for 2 drives in here, and they install toollessly. They just kind of slide into place and clip in. Installing a GPU is also easy peasy, and you can fit up to a 305mm long 2.5 slot card here if you want. The PCIe riser cable is already routed and installed, so you just clip it in as you normally would on a motherboard and then tighten down the thumb screws. One of the really great things about the H1 is that all of the I/O is facing downwards towards the bottom of the chassis, meaning that you don't have to mess with complicated pass-through cables or anything like that. All of your cabling will plug in as normal and then get routed down and out the back through this gap. Once all of your components are installed and you close the radiator hinge, things do get a little tight in here, but that's likely the reason that you see the H1 shipping with an AIO as opposed to NZXT recommending a low-profile air cooler or something like that. There's simply not enough space to allow for good air circulation in here, so the 140mm fan on the cooler draws fresh air in from the outside. This is the only fan in the case, so your separate GPU chamber will basically be entirely temperature regulated by the cooling solution on the graphics card itself. So let's talk about temperatures. Although recently I've been thinking that my testing hardware is a little meager and I maybe should upgrade it to something that generates more heat and stresses these system cooling solutions a little bit, I think that for this system it's probably pretty perfect. Keep in mind that in our CPU comparison, all other measurements were taken with a small tower air cooler though. Well, in this case, I did use the stock AIO, so temperatures are understandably lower. In fact, they were the lowest on our chart by quite a wide margin, so it appears that there was pretty good air circulation around the radiator despite the cramped interior space. GPU temps, on the other hand, were slightly worse than average, but that maybe is to be expected with the side panel being so close to the fans. As good as this case was, however, in basically every other aspect, it failed my testing big time in one category, and that's noise. With my standard CPU and GPU stress test running for about a half hour, I took my sound measurement and it was the highest that I've recorded in my case reviews at over 49 decibels. The worst performer before this was the Cooler Master NR400, which is kind of a dumpster fire all around. And other than that, no case has given me a reading over 45. It got pretty loud. This might be an issue for people looking to have an elegant looking desk piece, maybe in an office environment or a production studio. If your PC gets to doing anything computationally intensive and the fans ramp up, you could get really tired of it in a hurry. I think that alone will prevent me from giving this case an Indie Award because otherwise the NZXT H1 is a fantastic enclosure. It's tiny at only 13 liters, but still supports full-size GPUs, multiple storage drives, and an AIO. It comes bundled with some really great and pricey accessories, and assembly is just what every other small form factor case should aspire to be. Also, NZXT has bumped up their standard warranty from 2 years to 3 years on the case, the AIO, and the riser, and 10 years on the power supply, so they seemingly have confidence in their product. What about you guys? Do you think the NZXT H1 is a worthwhile purchase at $350? Sound off down below in the comments. Also, don't forget to get subscribed to the channel if you're not already, and as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.